That's enough. You're basically a stranger to us. Let's just throw you out into the yard.
Please wait. I was grabbed by my arm and thrown out into the yard. As the window sash closed sharply in front of me, I felt the blood drain from my face in despair. Why? This isn't right. Could Ken and Jessica, my in-laws, really be serious about making me live out here in the yard? The door was locked from the inside, and I was at a loss. I thought about going back to my parents' house, but it was too far, and I didn't think I had enough money for the fare. As my mind went blank, the door suddenly opened. I hoped they had reconsidered, but the voice that came back was still as cold as ice.
Here, eat this.
Jessica handed me a box of cup of noodles that had been stored for emergencies. Seeing it placed on the ground in a cardboard box, I was convinced that they were serious. You've got to be kidding. Wait, please. My desperate pleas were futile, and the door was mercilessly closed in front of me. If something happens to me, they'll be the ones in trouble. Maybe if I throw this out, they'll feel compelled to give me real food. In a fit of rage, I thought about throwing away everything inside. I opened the cardboard box somewhat roughly and found it packed tightly with cup noodles. What the? One of them was half open. I hesitantly reached out and picked up the cup of noodles. Wait, this is. My name is Linda Taylor. I'm a homemaker in my 40s. For the past several decades, since I married my husband, there has been something that has always troubled me. That is, hey, Ken, I always tell you to pick up your clothes. The living room was a mess with clothes that my husband, Ken, had taken off just after coming home from work. Ken has a habit of changing his clothes as soon as he gets home from work and just leaving them on the floor. Even now, he was naked on the sofa, scrolling through his phone. And he was laughing out loud while streaming videos at high volume. Perhaps because I interrupted his relaxation time, Ken spoke in a tone that clearly showed he was annoyed.
It's not a big deal. It's not bothering anyone.
It bothers me.
Huh? Why are you getting upset over something like this? No one likes a hysterical old lady these days. What are you going to do if you get even more wrinkles on your face?
His unwarranted verbal abuse made me frown. Yes, I had grown completely weary of his condescending tone and attitude. But the problem wasn't just that. It's really a small thing. Just put your clothes in the laundry basket.
Ugh, this is why I hate how nagging women can be. You're dependent on my earnings, yet do you realize you couldn't live properly without me?
As Ken continued to complain, he suddenly raised his voice and called out to someone.
Dad, Linda's telling me to pick up my clothes myself.
Wait a minute. Since it's a detached house, it probably won't bother the neighbors like in an apartment, but the loud voice still echoed. Proving this, heavy footsteps approached from the hallway, and the living room door was swung open somewhat violently. It was my father-in-law, Ronald. Ronald growled in a low voice from his throat and glared at me with a sharp gaze.
That's supposed to be your job.
Then, like the sound of an explosion, his voice hit my eardrums. All I could do was shrink a little under his intimidating presence.
Listen up. You married into this family, so you just need to obey your husband. That's how it is for women. Don't bother me or Ken with such trivial matters.
I'm sorry. At this point, all I could do was bow my head and apologize. Ken looked on, grinning at me. Ken's dad, Ronald, is a very traditional, old-school man. Whenever I try to talk about household chores or Ken's behavior, he would snap, "You don't need to think about that." It wasn't rare for him to raise his hand, and I had reflexively learned to make myself smaller. Ken had already shifted his interest back to a video on his smartphone, not looking at me. I felt gloomy, thinking I had to wait quietly until Ronald's anger subsided, when I was suddenly called upon by another person.
Hey, Linda, didn't I tell you not to use ham in the cooking?
It was Jessica, my mother-in-law, speaking from the kitchen where I had just finished preparing dinner.
It contains sodium metabisulfite, you know? It's not good for your health. And get rid of that strange device Ken brought home quickly. It emits electromagnetic waves that shrink our brain. A famous author said so.
Jessica wasn't like Ken, who twisted logic, nor was she like Ronald, who yelled. However, she was certainly not on my side. Even now, she sighed while holding special aluminum foil that supposedly blocks electromagnetic waves reaching the brain. Jessica had fallen for what they call conspiracy theories. I'm sorry, Jessica, but we need to get our protein.
There you go again. Where is the fish from? Did you check the source? And the additives too?
Jessica was overly sensitive to the effects of electromagnetic waves and harmful food additives. Because of this, cooking took much more effort than usual. Jessica would check every ingredient on food labels and restrict their use in cooking. Thus, the meals at the Taylor house could hardly be considered healthy. As I felt hopeless about the wasted ingredients, Jessica seemed to remember something.
By the way, you said before, didn't you, Linda? Ken is always eating out. You must be jealous, right?
It seemed that Ken had overheard her words.
Huh? Jealous?
Ken, who had been engrossed in his video, turned around irritably.
I'm going out for work, you know? It's not like I just have to do household chores like you.
That's not what I meant.
You're living off my earnings, and yet you dare to act so high and mighty?
While saying this, Ken glanced at Ronald, who looked displeased. Realizing what he was trying to do, all I could do was desperately apologize. I'm sorry. As a homemaker, it's true that I rely on Ken for our daily living. My finances are controlled by the allowance Ken gives me, and he quickly cuts the amount if he dislikes something. Satisfied with my trembling, apologetic demeanor, Ken said, "You can't do anything without me," and threw something at me.
As a punishment, you're having this for dinner tonight.
What rolled to my feet with a light sound was a cup of noodles. This is just. I'm the one who prepares the meals every day at the Taylor house. Housework is by no means easy, but I couldn't talk back, only remaining silent. In this house, I have no freedom. Why do I have to go through this? Unable to bear staying in the living room, I took the cup of noodles and went back to my room. From the living room, the loud sounds of the TV and Ken complaining about work could be heard. I boiled water in the pot, but I felt too disheartened to eat. Why can they say such hurtful things? Remembering their unreasonable demands made me feel down. I had merely asked him to correct a habit, not something unreasonable. The more I thought about it, the darker my mood became, and I wondered where I had made the wrong choice, feeling increasingly depressed. I couldn't move for a while, weighed down by a heavy heart. As bedtime approached and my hunger reached its limit, I reluctantly ate some instant noodles and took a cold bath. I had to get out quickly before I got too cold, because if I caught a cold, I would have to ask Ken for money and permission to go to the doctor. Once everyone was asleep, I tiptoed back to my room without making a sound and secretly took out my diary from the drawer. This diary is a record of daily events, intended to one day expose the way I've been treated. When Ken and I first started dating, he wasn't like this. He used to cherish our anniversaries and birthdays, and I never saw him use a rough tone. I married him believing he was a kind person, but the reality was completely different. In this house, I somehow feel treated like something tainted. Much of this can be attributed to Jessica's inclination towards conspiracy theories. Being unfamiliar with such theories, I have been shunned for supposedly leading a lifestyle that Jessica despises, fearing it might negatively affect her son. I am forced to prepare separate meals, and I've never been included in their circle of 3. However, I managed to find some solace in secretly eating what I like and writing in this diary. I hope I can expose this one day. I thought about asking for help more than once, but the fear of causing harm to my parents back home prevents me from taking any action. Escaping is difficult without sufficient funds, and who would hire a woman in her 40s who has been a homemaker all this time? At times like this, Ken's words, "You can't live without me," really hit home, and I felt so powerless that I was on the verge of tears. In the end, unable to find a solution, I could only curl up and sleep in my bed. The next day was eventful. The area outside my room was unusually noisy, and just as I wondered what had happened, Ronald hurriedly opened my door.
Hey, call an ambulance right now, Ken.
Apparently, Ken, who usually wakes up late, wasn't breathing when Ronald went to wake him up. I frantically called an ambulance. Even though he had oppressed me for years, I couldn't just ignore someone in life-threatening danger. While on the phone, I tried to perform CPR in desperation, but Ken was gone. How could this be? He seemed fine just the day before, so why did his health suddenly decline? Overwhelmed by the sudden event, I was devastated and couldn't even begin to prepare for the funeral after returning from the hospital. The Taylor house was filled with a somber atmosphere, unlike usual.
Come to think of it, he did seem unwell recently.
Is that so? Ronald murmured. Understandably, he had no energy left to yell at me now that his son had passed. I had no idea that Ken had been feeling unwell. Our only time together was during meals in separate rooms, and he was at work while I did housework during the day, so we barely saw each other. Yet, I couldn't help but think if I had noticed something amiss. Regardless of the deep rift between us, the fact that my husband was gone remained. Forgetting my usual demeanor, I leaned forward impulsively. Then why didn't he go to the hospital? If he was that ill, there must have been some signs, right?
I told him not to go, and to stop taking over-the-counter meds too. After all, you never know what you might be ingesting,
Jessica said in a matter-of-fact tone. It seemed that despite knowing about Ken's ill health, Her belief in conspiracy theories was too strong to abandon. Struck by such a ridiculous reason, I was overwhelmed by an immense sense of helplessness. Dumbfounded, I didn't know what to say, whether to Ken, who believed Jessica's words, or to Jessica herself, who never doubted her baseless conspiracies. Is that so? People tend to laugh when faced with overwhelmingly hopeless situations. I couldn't help but shiver slightly. However, that was probably not the best reaction.
What's that reaction for?
A voice so low it seemed to resonate from the depths shook my eardrums. I startled and looked up. Oh, this isn't.
What do you mean it's not? You just laughed, didn't you? Are you the kind of person who laughs at her husband's misfortune?
I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that. I was just thinking about Ken. I had completely done the unnecessary. Perhaps my emotions weren't functioning properly in the face of sudden misfortune. But it was too late to take it back, and Jessica's cold voice pierced through me.
No excuses. You laughed. That's a fact. Don't tell me you poisoned him.
No, I didn't do anything like that. I shook my head frantically, on the verge of tears. Indeed, there was every reason to suspect me since I had been treated harshly by Ken. Although most of the meals were dictated by Jessica, I was the one who prepared their food.
That's enough. Without Ken, you're nothing more than a stranger. Let's just throw you out in the yard.
Exactly. Don't think you can ever come back inside.
Please wait. Ronald grabbed my arm, and I was literally thrown out into the yard. The window sash snapped shut in front of me, and I felt the color drain from my face in despair. Why? This isn't right. Living in the yard was no joke. The door was locked from the inside, and I panicked, wondering if they were serious. How could I expose them if I couldn't even retrieve my diary? I thought about going back to my parents' house, but it was a considerable distance from here. I doubted I had enough money for transportation. As my mind went blank, wondering what to do, the door suddenly opened. Jessica? Throwing me out into the yard wouldn't look good to the neighbors either. Hoping she had reconsidered, I asked expectantly, but the voice that returned was still as cold as ice.
Don't call me so casually. After all, it would be troublesome for us if something happened. Here, eat this. It's full of additives, though.
And what was handed to me was a box of instant noodles that had been stored for emergencies. Seeing it placed on the ground in a cardboard box, I was convinced that they were serious. You must be kidding. Please wait. After all, there was no way to boil water or a kitchen in the yard, so eating properly was out of the question. But my desperate pleas were in vain, and the door was mercilessly closed in front of me. I stood there dumbfounded for a moment. But as time passed, I began to feel anger boiling up from within. I can't stand this anymore. What had I done to deserve this? It was true that laughing was my mistake, but they won't listen to a word I say. They don't even try to hear me out. They have never been. There was no freedom for me here. Anything they didn't want was simply eliminated. Talking was useless with someone who had no intention of listening. If something happens to me, they'll be in trouble. Maybe if I throw this out, they might be inclined to give me proper food. In frustration, I thought about throwing out all the contents of the instant noodles. It seemed wasteful, but continuing to live on instant noodles was out of the question. As I opened the cardboard box somewhat roughly, I found the packed noodles. Wait, this one's open. There was just one, the lid halfway open. I clenched my fist, a bad feeling gripping me. Could this also be one of their ways to harass me? Tentatively, I reached out and picked up the cup of noodles. As I fully opened the half-open lid, instead of the dried noodles and toppings, there was a small black device and a piece of notepaper inside. What is this? I unfolded the notepaper. The letter said, "I'm truly sorry for the long hardship. Unclosed is a voice recorder. Please take this evidence to the police. Also, the envelope contains some money for you. Use it to live freely. This is." The note was on elegant wisteria stationery, with neat handwriting done with a pen. I had seen it only a few times, but it was unmistakably Jessica's handwriting. Inside the envelope were 5 $100 bills, and similarly, envelopes, each containing $500, were stuffed into the small gaps of the cup noodles packed in the cardboard box. Additionally, some contained accusations detailing the domestic behaviors of Ronald and Ken. Before I knew it, I felt as if I had been pushed from behind, and I found myself running to the nearby police station. "Please help me." Breathing heavily and barefoot, the officers immediately responded to my appearance. As they read the accusation and listened to my story, their expressions darkened rapidly. I explained how I had been thrown out into the yard and was unable to enter the house or go back to my parents' home. Considering these factors, they judged it to be an urgent issue. The officer, with a serious look, patted my shoulder reassuringly.
"This is terrible. Linda, you've done well. Can you lead us to your house?"
Yes. A turning point had finally come in my days of near despair. The days of being oppressed by the Taylor family might just change. Filled with a faint hope, I returned home when suddenly a furious shout echoed from the entrance.
What are you doing?
It was Ronald's enraged voice. Then, a sharp sound like something being hit followed, and we hurriedly opened the front door. What happened? There, panting heavily, was Ronald, and Jessica, sitting on the floor clutching her reddened cheek. Ronald, blinded by anger, hadn't even noticed the arrival of the police. It was clear what had happened. "Jessica!" As I ran towards her with a scream-like shout, Jessica finally looked up. And the moment her vacant eyes caught me and the officer, she burst out laughing as if she couldn't hold it back any longer.
Ha, ha.
"What happened, Jessica?"
Laughing at a time like this. Ken's gone, and now talking about divorce. Don't joke around.
Amid the strange behavior of both, a crumpled divorce paper lay on the floor. Could it be that Jessica had confronted him with it? She had always been submissive to Ronald, never seeming to defy him. Laughing hysterically, as if she had gone mad, Ronald raised his hand to strike.
"Stop."
But a quick-moving officer restrained him by locking his arms. Only then did Ronald seem to realize that the police were present. As his complexion turned pale, Jessica started laughing again.
Ha ha.
What really happened, Jessica? Her increasingly unusual demeanor left us all frozen, unable to move. I tentatively called out, trying to gauge the situation. Jessica, flushed with excitement and still smiling, blurted out,
Finally, it's over for you.
What do you mean?
Ronald, receiving an empty stare, squeezed out a voice as if shaken. Not giving Ronald a moment to compose himself, Jessica continued.
Right now, you can't move, can you? You want to hit me, but you can't, right? Do you know why? Because that officer over there has more power than you. Linda and I have felt the same way you feel now for a long time.
What?
I've been waiting for this day to come for so long.
I was too shocked to form coherent words. The statement Jessica had just made was clearly considerate of me. Jessica suddenly stopped laughing, and her face went blank.
You always do this. If something displeases you, you raise your hand immediately, and you're not satisfied unless others behave exactly as you want. Dialogue is out of the question. You think it's only natural for those weaker than you to follow your commands, and for you to be supported by others. You've been abusive towards me ever since Ken was born. You knew I couldn't escape because I was a homemaker who had become estranged from her parents. That's why I've been planning this day for a long time.
Jessica, her voice icy, stared Ronald down as she began to explain her long-standing plan.
Initially, the evidence was insufficient, and there was Ken to consider, so I planned to carry it out when Ken was independent and had saved enough money. I never imagined he would marry Linda so quickly and then start doing the same things you did. Ken was more cowardly than you, but also more cunning. I pretended to be a crazy conspiracy theorist, feeding you unhealthy meals on purpose.
Hearing this, I realized something. Indeed, as a homemaker tasked with caring for Ronald and Jessica, I was responsible for preparing meals for the three of us. I followed Jessica's preferences for avoiding additives and foreign products, resulting in meals that were hardly what one would consider healthy. But Jessica, who disliked me, always said, "I don't want to eat the same food as you," and made me cook different meals for myself. So, I cooked as I pleased and ate what I liked. If what she said was true, was it all an act? And if so, had Jessica intentionally excluded me from her plans all along?
It was a long battle, but then Ken turned out exactly as I had planned. Surely his daily overwork and poor diet took their toll.
Jessica paused, perhaps thinking of her son, her voice dropping for a moment. However, she quickly began to laugh as if ignited.
But now Ken's inheritance can be given to Linda. You and I are going to hell together. Ha ha.
Ronald seemed unable to say anything more. He stared wide-eyed at Jessica, who was laughing like a mad woman.
You always acted like a king at home, but do you see now? You were so powerless.
It wasn't just me who had suffered. Jessica had suffered and endured far longer than I had, and today she had reached the culmination of her struggles. Indeed, she had been fighting throughout her life, even though it twisted her existence.
We'll be going now. You both will accompany us to the station. We'll discuss everything there.
The officer said quietly. Ronald no longer raised his voice in anger. It was as if all the energy that had driven him until now was gone, and he hung his head in defeat. As he was led away by the police officer, he said in a barely audible voice,
I'm sorry.
However, Jessica responded with a voice that sounded like a mix of laughing and crying.
Apologizing now, what good does it do?
And so, we walked quietly to the police station, none of us uttering a single word. Ronald readily admitted to everything documented in the accusation and recorded on the voice recorder regarding the situation inside the Taylor household. As a result, it was determined that Ken's sudden health change was not accidental but planned, indicating criminal activity. Of course, Jessica was identified as the perpetrator. After all was said and done, Jessica, who had seemed spiteful and had laughed maniacally, became meek, as if all her previous behavior had been a facade.
Linda, I'm truly sorry for involving you in my plan.
No, please don't apologize. You've been suffering for so long, Jessica.
No, even so, it doesn't change the fact that I've hurt you repeatedly.
I remembered the neat handwriting on the letter that was inside the cup of noodles. Now it seemed that the considerately written words truly reflected her genuine character.
It must have been very sad to have the meals you prepared thrown away for no good reason.
No. I shook my head. While it was true that it was hard at the time, and I had many tearful nights, it now seemed like a trivial thing. It wasn't about forgiving or not forgiving. I just thought that we deserved to be released from it. It's okay now. It's all over. Then, 10 years passed. Today is Jessica's birthday. Since then, having gathered the courage to start working, I was fortunate to find a warm workplace and am leading an independent life. And today, I had quietly saved up some of my salary to take Jessica on a little trip. Look, Jessica, the wisteria flowers are beautiful. After the events at the Taylor household settled down, Jessica had fallen ill. Pushing her wheelchair, which had become essential for her mobility, we walked under an arch bursting with magnificent wisteria blossoms.
Yes, they are beautiful.
Jessica seemed to be enjoying this thoughtful trip. After all that had happened with the Taylor family, I had decided to support Jessica. Now, she is an important part of my family. We care for each other, share words, and sometimes enjoy moments of interaction like this. Jessica, I have a special birthday cake prepared. Let's eat it together when we get back to the hotel.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
We chatted as we slowly walked under the wisteria flowers, visiting nearby boutiques and tourist shops. Jessica seemed to be enjoying the trip, so it was safe to say it was a great success. We have our freedom now, and we do what we want, following our hearts. While hoping days like these would continue, I began to hum, "Happy birthday to you,"